Well, good morning. Welcome to New Life. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your Sunday morning with us. We know we say this all the time, but we really do appreciate it. We never take for granted the fact that you would take an hour or so of your Sunday morning to spend it here with us. So whether this is first time or thousandth time, wherever you are in that stage, we're just grateful that you are here with us. We are at the very beginning of a series of messages called The Jesus Project. We started this basically at the end of November, and it's going to take us about 3 years to finish. So we're like a quarter of the first year through. So I don't know what that may. I don't know, like a 12th of the way through or something like that. We're getting there. We're making some progress. We're kind of into this thing now. And if you've been following along, essentially what the premise of this series is this idea that Jesus is someone who was unique and incredibly different when it comes to his person in the world. And yet we all have our own impressions, our own interpretations of who Jesus is. And the impression and interpretation of Jesus that you have and that I have tends to be one that feels familiar and comfortable to us and doesn't tend to be one that challenges us and pushes back on us. And yet what we find in the Gospels is that Jesus consistently pushes back on people's expectations and interpretations of him. So if you have made it this far into the Jesus Project series and you are still following along, I give you a lot of credit, and here's why. Because you've showed a willingness to at least do some investigating, at least do some digging, at least do some thinking about your preconceived ideas about who Jesus is and what it would mean for you to follow Jesus. And wherever you are on the spectrum of that journey, sort of beginning, middle, towards the end, however you feel you find yourself in that, there's this simple and revolutionary and powerful act of just choosing to look at Jesus intentionally, choosing to take seriously what he said, put our lives under the microscope a little bit. And it immediately puts us into the sort of tension that we as human beings tend to avoid, because to live as a sincere pursuer of Jesus, a sincere follower of Jesus, is to live at the same time in two different worlds. It's to still live in this world that feels like home, and yet to recognize that this world is not ultimately home for us. That it feels like, as human beings, that we are familiar and we are comfortable when we are surrounded by people who look like us and think like us and act like us and sort of dress like us and drive like us and do all the things that we do. And yet, Jesus is inviting us to live as part of a different kingdom, as part of a different world. And so when we try to live in that world and in this world at the same time, I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but there is a restlessness about living in this world. Because on the one hand, we recognize that we are citizens of the earth. We are sons and daughters of the human race. So this world, its people, its places, feels very much like home to us. This is the air that we have been breathing from the moment that we first took breath. And so we are incredibly familiar and we are incredibly comfortable here. This world feels normal to us. These people are our family. And whether we like them or not, and whether we think they're a little weird or not, and whether we think they're a little, and if you don't think your family members are weird, then you should maybe consider that you might be the weird one, but whatever. We'll just leave that alone. No matter what we think about them, no matter how strange they feel to us, there is something familiar and there is something comfortable about us as human beings. We recognize to some extent or another that we belong to them and they belong to us. And whether they're part of our immediate family or they're just part of this larger community of human beings, we can at least recognize in them something that looks and feels like us. And yet, while we are living in this world, I don't know if you've ever felt this, but I've felt this, and maybe you have experienced it and never knew exactly how to describe it. We feel some sort of homesickness in ourselves, even while we live in a world that has always been our home. We feel maybe even a sense of homelessness, a sense of restlessness inside of us, even when we are living among our people where everything is familiar, everything is comfortable. This is at least in part a reflection of the kind of spiritual longing and yearning that we have for a true homeland that is somehow unfamiliar and yet feels familiar to us. It tells us there is something out there that would actually be home. St. Augustine said it this way in his Confessions like thousands of years ago, 1,000 plus years ago. It says, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. C.S. Lewis, a little closer to home, said it this way. He said, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Not most probably, the most probable. I just realized I had a typo. Apologies to Clive Staples. I apologize, Mr. Lewis. Because he saw, and you saw, and I see, that there is in us as human beings, there is in us this certain restlessness, there is this certain homesickness, there is this reality that everything that we experience in this world, all of the good stuff, all of the amazing things, all of the familiar and comfortable things that we work through as human beings in this life, it doesn't quite satisfy our heart and our soul the way that we wish that it would. And so whenever we decide to take this journey of following Jesus and we try to experience, we try to look at him, we introduce ourselves to this tension that we are part citizens of this world and we are part citizens of another world. And we want to be as fully present to this world as we possibly can, while at the same time living with a different set of values, with a different set of beliefs, maybe with a different set of, sort of ethics and principles about the way that we choose to live our lives that feels a little bit out of step with this world at times. I don't know if you've ever felt that, but I have. The way that I want to live, the way that I feel called and led to live as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven sometimes puts me out of step with the way it seems like everyone else wants to live their lives. And so this morning we're going to look at probably Jesus' most famous extended block of teaching. It's called, most commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. But I don't really think that's an accurate description of it, so I'm going to just abandon that. We're not going to call it the Sermon on the Mount anymore. We're just going to call it an introduction to life in the kingdom of heaven. We're just going to call it an introduction, a very first basic step in the direction of life in the kingdom of heaven. It is going to be about how do we live in the tension of living in this world with all of its stuff and also knowing that we belong to a different world with all of its stuff. And the way that Jesus is going to do this is he's going to teach us in such a way that we would see that we are meant to live in the other world, but that we are living in this world for now and for this time and for this space. You get 70, 80, 90, 100 years, whatever you get on the planet. We're living in this world now and yet recognizing that this is not our permanent place to belong. That we actually belong to a different world. Matthew and Luke both record this healthy chunk of Jesus' teaching fairly early on in Jesus' ministry. And Luke and Matthew, they sort of put it in different places and they sort of organize the thoughts and the sayings a little bit differently. In fact, Luke has some specific sayings that Matthew doesn't have, and Matthew has some specific sayings that Luke doesn't have. And Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is this really long, extended block of teaching where Jesus just sort of lays out his vision for the kingdom of heaven. This is what basic tension as a follower of Jesus is supposed to look like. It is not supposed to resolve all of our questions. In fact, it's probably supposed to give you more questions. And it's supposed to leave you with a sense of longing. It's supposed to leave you with a sense of hunger for the other world. And so for the next few weeks, we're going to go through Matthew's chunk of teaching because we can't do both. And so I just picked Matthew. It's a little bit longer, has a little bit more detail. But if you want, you could find Luke's Sermon on the Mount. It won't call it the Introduction to Discipleship in the Kingdom of Heaven like I do. So if you just look up Luke's Sermon on the Mount, you'll find it. You'll be able to read that for yourself over the next few weeks. But what I understand, or at least what I think, is that it tells us that the gospel writers, when they were writing about the life of Jesus, they recognized that if there was a person who was like Jesus, and if Jesus' teaching was as powerful and compelling as we believe that it was, then it would make sense that as Jesus roamed through the Galilean countryside and down through Samaria and over to Jerusalem and Judea and did all of the teaching that he did, I guarantee you he said the same thing way more than just one time. In fact, the way that I like to think about this introduction to citizenship in the kingdom of heaven is this is like Jesus' greatest hits, sort of collected together into one, 3-chapter long section. And this is probably stuff that Matthew and Luke and the disciples, John and James and Peter and Andrew, this is the stuff that they heard over and over and over again until they had heard it so many times, they could essentially repeat it back to you and say, I remember Jesus every time we used to go into a new place, he would say something like this, and he would say something like this, and he would say something like this. And Matthew seems to take it all together, put it all into one place, and here is how the story begins. Seeing the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. This is Jesus in the Galilee region, sort of his home area. And he looks out, and there's crowds of people that have already begun to follow along, have already begun to be attracted to his teaching, have already begun to be attracted to the things that he's saying about the kingdom of heaven as he's, kind of expressing, hey, the kingdom of heaven is drawing near. Time is here for us to do something significant. We are about to start something new in the world. And so these crowds of people gather, and both Matthew and Luke record that there were these large masses of people that were around Jesus wherever he went. And yet the setting for this little introduction to citizenship in the kingdom of heaven and the intended audience for this is not the crowds of people. It's the people who have chosen to make a decision to come and follow him. The people that he's talking to, he says, he saw the crowds and then he invited the disciples to come in. And I don't think it meant the crowds weren't there, but I think it means that he understood that what he was saying had unique and special significance and importance to that group of men and women who were going to become the foundation of this movement in the world. And this is a revolutionary set of teaching, not because it's great ideas and not because it's just this great philosophy, but because the people who heard it first actually took it seriously. That when Jesus said these things to them, the things that we're about to read for the next few weeks together, they believed that they were meant to live these things out. It wasn't just that they were meant to believe these things and say, oh yeah, remember when Jesus said all that really cool stuff and it was so revolutionary and the crowds were so astonished. It was that they believed that they were meant to embody the teaching that Jesus was giving in such a way that it changed their entire lives. And they turned the world upside down because when they went up on a mountain and Jesus invited them to himself and said the things that we are about to read together, they said, you know what? I should do that. And this is for free. I didn't put this in my notes. If we, as 2023 followers of Jesus, intend to make any sort of impact on our world, then we should probably pay close attention to what Jesus is about to say. And he opened his mouth and he taught them, and you know these, you've heard these before. He opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad. Okay, Jesus, it's a little extreme. For your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And as Jesus opens the curtain, says, here's what you need to understand about my kingdom. Here's what you need to understand about my world that I'm inviting you into, this tension that you feel about the world that you live in and all of its stuff and all of its ways of living and being and interacting with each other. Here is what my world looks like. And it begins with these statements that we call the Beatitudes, which in this translation is translated, blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek, and the merciful. Some other translations, depending on which one you're reading, it may say, happy are the poor in spirit, happy are the meek, happy are the ones who are pure in heart. And the interesting thing about this word is our English words, and this is one of those places where sometimes our English words don't always communicate the full sense of what Jesus is trying to communicate. Because when you hear and when I hear blessed, we sort of reduce it down to this religious sort of connotation. Someone receives a blessing from someone who is a religious or spiritual figure, a pastor, a priest, a bishop, somewhere along the line. Someone pronounces a blessing on you, and you receive it as a sort of word from God to you, that you're good. I have been blessed. This is the way that we sort of use this word in our sort of current cultural connotation. I am blessed, and by that we mean everything about my life is good. We lie about it all the time, but whatever. Just leave that alone. How are you? I'm blessed. I have all my stuff. God has blessed me. It doesn't quite communicate what Jesus is saying here. And when we say happy, and again, those translations that use that word happy there, happy for us feels like a feeling. And happy for us, at least when you read those words, happy are those who mourn. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. Happy are the merciful, happy are the meek, happy are the poor in spirit, happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And so I was, kind of as I was digging into this, I was trying to figure out a way to communicate exactly what Jesus is saying. And one of the commentators that I read said it this way. It was to think about an idiomatic expression that Jesus is using, sort of this language to speak to his audience, that he wants to communicate something about the world that he was calling them into. And here's the way I would say it. Bright is the world of kingdom citizens. There's a Welsh translation. This is probably maybe too much for some of you, but I'm a nerd, and I have the microphone. So there's a Welsh translation of this group of Beatitudes that says it this way: white or bright is the world of those who are poor in spirit. Bright is the world of those who are meek and merciful. Bright is the world. In other words, they are living in a world that is not nearly as dark and depressing and sort of overwhelming as the world that we tend to live and find ourselves in every single day. Bright is the world of the men and women who choose to live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, even while they are living in this world. Bright is the world of the men and women who choose to live in the way that Jesus invites us to live. Bright is the world of people who are not overwhelmed by all of the junk of this world, and who instead choose to live differently while they are here. Embrace a different world, a different kingdom, and set of values than maybe what the rest of the world around you is embracing. And having laid out those qualities, and again, we could spend a whole lot of time on each of them, but we're not going to today. Having laid all of that out, I just want to focus on the last one. Blessed are those, or white or bright is the world of those who are persecuted for the sake of their righteousness. White is the world of those who have all kinds of things said about them that aren't true. White and bright is the world of all of those men and women who choose to live in my kingdom and with its values. And because they live in my kingdom with its world and its values, people look at you and say, you are naive. People look at you and say, well, you're just living with some kind of spiritual crutch. You're just, sort of living for some eternal reward someday, and you're just hoping to escape this world. Bright is the world of people who have everything stacked against them, sometimes by people in this world who think you are absolutely out of your mind. Bright is the world of those who have that sort of perspective, to the degree that they would rejoice and be glad when people say you're crazy. Bright is the world of people who have that much hope in a world that is not like this, who would cling with that much conviction to the truth of a world that is not like this one, that they would be willing to have people say all sorts of stuff about us. as long as it meant that we were living for a world that was truly home. When Jesus says, when you live this way, don't be surprised if people misunderstand you. Don't be surprised. If you are going to try to sincerely follow Jesus, you should not be shocked if people misunderstand you. You should not be shocked if people misrepresent you, if people say all sorts of things about you that you know are not true, and that people close to you know are not true. You should not be surprised. In fact, what you find is that Jesus ultimately experiences this worse than you and worse than me. And even in the early stages of his message, he says, hey, point forward. Let's think about this. If you are going to live this way, people will not always understand the choices that you make. People will not always understand the decisions that you make. It will not always make rational sense to them. And yet, if you want to live in this world, and you want to live as part of this kingdom, then you have the privilege of standing in a world that does not understand you, because sometimes it does not understand itself, and say, I know the way home. And you may think I'm weird. And you may think I'm out of my mind. And you may think that I have lost all connection with reality. And I don't know if I can fully explain it, and I don't know if I can fully articulate it, but here's what I have come to believe. I have come to believe that I know how to get home. And if you want to get home, I can point you in the direction of the one who leads us home. And you may not understand me and the decisions that I make, and you may not understand the choices and the way that I choose to live my life, and it may look weird and out of step and totally out of touch and out of tune with all of your world and all of your reality. But here's what I know. I know how to get home. I know that I wasn't made for this world. I wasn't made just to satisfy the desires that can be satisfied in this world. And then here's what Jesus says after he says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are those who are misunderstood because they point the direction home. You are the salt of the earth. If you never understood where that little idiom came from, it came from Jesus. He gave it to you. You are the salt of the earth. So when you say someone is that salt of the earth person, you are taking Jesus' teaching, you're using it. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. And Jesus sort of pushes the metaphor a little bit. He says, blessed are those, white is the world, bright is the world, of those who live as citizens of another kingdom while they still live in this world. White is the world of those who are misunderstood, misrepresented for pointing the direction home. Because you who are living that way in this world, you are meant to live as salt of the earth. You are meant to live your lives in such a way that you experience the reality of another world and you bring that into contact with the reality of this world. There's a couple of different ways I think that we could take and understand that metaphor that Jesus is using, but here's the way that I think about it, is that heavenly citizens are here to flavor the earth. That's why you're here. You are here. If you are following Jesus, if you are sincerely pursuing Jesus, and you think, well, I don't know where I fall on that continuum, but if you're here and you're still asking the questions, then I would suggest you're in. I mean, you're moving in the direction. Here we go. You are here to flavor the earth around you. The comment about the salt losing its saltiness at least seems for me to lean in that direction, that we are meant to flavor the life that belongs to the citizens of this world because we are set down here among them. Jesus didn't say, well, once you follow me, I'm going to just kind of take you and remove you from the earth. I'm going to remove you from your family and your friends and your coworkers, even the ones that you wish that you could get away from, right? He didn't say, I'm going to take you out of all of that stuff and I'm going to put you over here in a special little place where you get to have all of your blessings and you get to have all of your good stuff and you leave all of those bad, corrupt people behind. He said, actually, the reason that you're still here is because you are meant to flavor the life of the world around you. That you are meant to live as a citizen of a bright world, landing among those who are not there yet. And that somehow, in the way that you choose to live your life, you might bring out of someone else around you their hunger, their desire, their awareness for the world that they were created for, that you believe that you have somehow found your way home to, perhaps by your meekness. Notice Jesus doesn't say by how strong and powerful and authoritative you are. White is the world of the meek. Perhaps by your mercy to your neighbor or your friend or your family member or your coworker. Perhaps by your purity of heart. Perhaps by your pursuit of the right thing, even when it is the difficult thing. Perhaps somehow by all of those things, you might draw out of your fellow citizens in this world their desire to live as citizens of the other world. Here's what I think. No one wants to taste salt. What you want is you want to taste the flavor of the thing that the salt is supposed to be flavoring. If you make a meal and you just dump a big old pile of salt in the middle of it and you just kind of eat that, I mean, I like salt, but I don't like it that much. I don't want to just taste salt. What I want to taste is what's around the salt, what the salt has sort of worked its way through and worked its way into what it has drawn to the surface for us. And so we are, as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, we are invited to not just be a big block of salt laying in the middle of the world saying, look how salty we are. They know how salty we are. We've told them how salty we are. We've showed them how salty we are. What we have not done is we have not flavored the world around us. We have not moved ourselves in such a way that as we are distributed through the citizens of this earth and this kingdom, that we've allowed their longing for home to come to the surface. We are, and I think this is, we are so often troubled by the presence of evil in the world. We are. I mean, and again, even I think for us Christians, we sort of feel like hypersensitive to it. But perhaps what would be more puzzling and more thought-provoking is the presence of genuine goodness in a world that seems to be so bad. What would the world think if they tasted such genuine, God-like goodness when it was found around them? I think that this is what Jesus is after. And I think what he believed when he said his kingdom citizens should be the salt of the earth. I don't think he meant that they should know how salty we are. I think he meant that they should know that there's something in us that speaks to what's in them, that says, I know what's in you. I know the longing that's in you, and I know where it's satisfied. I know the direction to move, to find the thing that you are looking for, to find the home that you are seeking for. And then he closes out this section this way. He says, you're the salt of the earth, and also, if you didn't get that one, here's another metaphor. Here's another one that works for you. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on a stand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to you for how good, no, did I misquote? Give glory to you who did the good works? No. that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven, who is the King of the world that they're longing for. It's not about you and how good you are and how good you can be and how salty you can be as a Christian. How bright light you can be. But it's whether or not you can reflect into a dark world the light of another world that is incredibly bright and white and good. It's about whether or not you can live your life like a city set on a hill, like a lamp in the middle of the house that's meant to give light to every corner of that dark place. Because as followers of Jesus, citizens of this kingdom, we reflect the light of a brighter world. That's what you're here for. That's what I'm here for. It's not to say, look how bright I am as a light. It's just to say, look how bright, look how beautiful, look how amazing the world is that belongs to my Father in heaven. Look at the goodness that is present in this world because something shines into it from a different place, from a different space that isn't clouded, that isn't darkened by all of its evil, all of its brokenness, and all of its sinfulness. Let your light reflect into this world, so that when people see your light reflecting into this world, they would glorify your Father who is in heaven, who is inviting them to live in the same way that He has invited you to live. We should shine into the darkness with the light of works that are so good that the only explanation for the choices that we make and the way that we choose to live our life is that their source and their motivation comes from another, better, brighter world. And that as we do that, we are meant to make this world look like that world. And that the more that we as citizens of the kingdom of heaven say, let me make this world look like that world, the closer we get to what Jesus is after. Jesus saw Himself as inaugurating, as birthing, as bringing into being this new, bright and light world that He knew was breaking into human history in the moment that He was preaching, teaching. And He was inviting others, those first disciples, to say, hey, would you come and live and come and follow me? Would you come and flavor the earth? Would you come and reflect the light of this kingdom everywhere that you go? Would you make it so that in the places that you live, this world looks a little more like that world? That this earth and its mess and brokenness and chaos and disorder would come a little bit closer to the kingdom of heaven. Here's what I think, and maybe this is a relief to you. You are not going to change the world. It's not. There you go. You can take that burden off of your shoulders for today. Maybe you pick it up again tomorrow, and you might imagine that that's going to happen tomorrow. But at least for today, at least for this moment, can we just take off of our shoulders the idea and the burden that somehow you and I are going to change the world? Because you're not, and I'm not. But what we can do is we can reflect the light of another world into the limited space in this world that you occupy. Your family and your friends and your workplace and your community, and sort of you start to broaden that out a little bit. The light starts to dissipate. It starts to get a little bit harder to shine light out into further and further spaces. And so we get so overwhelmed with all of that stuff. Here's what I want to encourage you with this morning. You're not here to change the world. Jesus was here to change the world. And what He was here to do was to shine so brightly into your life that you would reflect that light into the lives of other people around you. It's not to change the world. It's to speak to this world and say, to this world in your limited capacity, that there is a life that is more real and more substantial than the one that we are tempted to live in its place. And as Jesus invites us there, we cannot escape our calling to live as salt and light to the earth and our fellow citizens here, to shine out in such a way that we become a beacon of hope and goodness that calls other people every time they come in contact with us to ask, where does that come from? Why is it that you choose to live in such a weird way? Why is it that you choose to live so differently from everybody else, it seems like? Why is it that you seem to live in such a way that you are satisfied with those things and those longings that I have that I can't ever seem to fill? Why is it that you seem like you have filled those? And that's the moment when we get to point to the source of the goodness. That's the place where we get to point to the source of the light and the flavor and the grace and the mercy that has flooded our hearts and gets spread out into the world around us. Bright is the world of the men and women who choose to live this way, as citizens of a kingdom that doesn't belong to this world, that doesn't rise and fall on the things of this world, but that keeps pointing us home. Would you pray with me this morning? Jesus, we're grateful that you have invited us to live in a different way. Jesus, we're grateful that you came to change the world. And that part of the way that you're changing the world is by changing us, changing that little space around us, changing that little space that we feel like is so small and so insignificant. And yet, if we could just embrace this in these places, would make such a powerful and profound statement about your kingdom and your way of life. And so, Jesus, we ask, would you continue to call us to live this way? Would you invite us out of this darkness, out of its mess, out of its chaos? Would you allow us to live in the middle of it in such a way that we keep pointing people home? We want nothing more than to be instruments of your glory and your goodness and your grace in this world. Make it so. In Jesus' name, amen.